I'm here on the Senate floor today for the 8th time now to oppose President Biden's sweeping vaccine mandate. I've introduced a dozen bills to one way or another limit, clarify, or counteract his still unpublished mandate. Now, make no mistake, I'm opposed to the mandate categorically. I strongly dispute even the contention that one man, the President of the United States, has authority to do this. He doesn't. I also fundamentally push back on the idea, the basic moral premise that it's acceptable to put people in this position. To tell people that they've got to choose between having a job and being able to put bread on the table for their children, on the one hand, or on the other hand, accepting a medical procedure that they don't want, either because of a religious objection or a specific medical condition or otherwise. I'm categorically opposed to this being done. It shouldn't be done through the federal government. It certainly shouldn't be done by one person, the President of the United States. He doesn't have the authority to do that. And to highlight how concerned I am about this, I'm coming down to the floor day after day to offer a different legislative proposal that, at a minimum, would make some of the effects of the mandate less severe, less painful, less cruel, less draconian. Each time I've come to ask the Senate to pass what would frankly be uncontroversial measures that should be uncontroversial. And each time I've done that, one of my colleagues or another from the other side of the aisle has objected. This is unfortunate for a number of reasons. This mandate, which is still unavailable and to be examined by the public, by the way, is already showing the terrible power that even the threat of a government-imposed vaccine mandate wields. Businesses across the country are suspending, punishing, or firing employees who haven't had the COVID shot. Even without government enforcement, the mere threat, the mere talk of the possibility of a threat of the mandate is making it harder for everyday American families to put food on the table in increasingly difficult economic times, times fraught with uncertainty. This isn't fair. This isn't right. Deep down, we know it. Now, lest anyone try to dismiss the victims of this misguided and ill-founded effort, these aren't people you can just otherize. These aren't people you can just imagine to be someone you don't like. No, these are mothers and fathers. They're our neighbors. They're people who, like far too many Americans these days, are just trying to get by. I'm going to continue to fight this for them. I'm going to continue to push back on this unlawful, misguided effort for them. And you know, in the meantime, it's important that we be very clear and that we be very consistent. In this effort, I've been supremely clear. I'm not in any way, shape, or form against the COVID-19 vaccine. I've been fully vaccinated. Every member of my family has been fully vaccinated with my encouragement. I encourage people all the time, and I repeat that encouragement this very moment from the United States Senate floor, that I encourage people to get vaccinated. I see the development of these vaccines as a miracle, one that's helping and has already helped countless Americans to avoid the harms of COVID-19. That doesn't undercut the fact that this mandate is pushing government and government control far beyond constitutional limits and into distinctively private decisions, that belong to the American people and not to their government. That's why I'm fighting against the mandate, and that's why I've come to the Senate floor 8 times now to help. So today, I offered up a bill that should have itself been supremely uncontroversial. It's a reaffirmation of parental rights that our government has respected and honored from the very beginning. My Parental Consent for Vaccination Act would simply require that any COVID-19 vaccine mandate issued by the federal government must include a requirement that informed parental consent be provided before the shot is administered to a minor. What would be controversial about that? On what planet would we not want to have parents involved in that decision? On what planet would it be okay to administer a shot to a child without parental notification and consent? Allow me to put this in some context. Parental consent is required for field trips. Your child is going to the zoo or the park or anywhere else for a field trip. Parental consent form. Parental consent forms are familiar to every parent and every child and every teacher in America. It's what we do. You're going to go on a field trip, you got to have your parental consent form. No parental consent form, no field trip. Parental consent is required for extracurricular activities, for sports, student government, club activities, all sorts of things. Parental consent is required before most schools can administer a Tylenol to a child. And that is, after all, the right approach. Despite what some candidates have said in recent political campaigns, parents are people who should be informed. And they should be involved in their children's education and in their health decisions. There's good reason for this. Through thousands of years of human civilization, we've come to an understanding, quite appropriately, that parents are simply better equipped to make these decisions than are other people, certainly better than the impersonal arm of the government. Parents are people who know their children. Parents are people who know their children's medical history. Parents also love their children. Parents have their children's best interests at heart when they make decisions regarding, involving, or affecting them. Government cannot do any of these things like parents can. Not in any way, shape, or form. There's a good reason for this, and it's because government doesn't love their children. It's not that government categorically always means them harm. That's not it. Government isn't a person. It's not a being. Government doesn't have arms with which to embrace or shelter or protect their children. Government doesn't have a heart with which to love their children. Government, when reduced to its core, when we really break it down to what it is, government is simply force. Politically permissible, officially sanctioned, coercive force. It's violence or the threatened use of violence with a badge under the cover of official authority. Now, we need government. We need government to protect life, liberty, and property. We need government to protect people from harm. But we've got to use it carefully. When we misapprehend what government is and we lose sight of this relationship between the people and the government, with the understanding that the government is there to serve the people and not the other way around, when we lose sight of the fact that government is just the official use of coercive force, and we start to revere it as some sort of benevolent, omnipotent, omniscient presence, bad things happen. Because government, while necessary, is also dangerous, no less so than other things that are necessary, like water and like fire and like electricity, like wind, like oxygen. All these things, if not controlled, if not managed in one way or another, if not accounted for, can become dangerous and inevitably can prove deadly. So thank heaven above that Almighty God assigned primary care of children to parents and not to government. And thank heaven above that Almighty God endowed each and every human being with these inalienable rights and with the understanding that government is there to serve and protect them and not the other way around. Unfortunately, in some places, like right here in our nation's capital, government seems almost to have completely lost the plot. Right here in the District of Columbia, the D.C. public school system is one in which minors can receive medical procedures without the school obtaining the consent of the parents or even informing the parents. In other places across the nation, this slippery slope is already leading governments to consider life-changing school-provided medical procedures without parental notice or consent. As a parent, and for that matter, as a human being, as a citizen of this country, this thought sends shivers down my spine, and not at all in a good way. You see, while the federal government has almost no legitimate role in making decisions in our primary and secondary education systems, these are to be left for states and local governments. It's a very, very little role for the federal government to play in that area at all. It's an area that should be left to parents and students and teachers, and where government is involved, it nearly always is supposed to be state and local officials, not federal ones. With this bill, we can make sure that the federal government doesn't endorse or heaven forbid, mandate this dangerous approach to medical decisions for minors. It's not something that we should do. And so that's why I came here to ask precisely that. I came here to ask that we provide assurances for parents and for children. Once again, make no mistake, I'm for the vaccine. I'm categorically against the mandate. The mandate should not happen. The mandate is wrong. The mandate is without legal foundation. It's constitutionally indefensible, especially when exercised by one person at a level of government not equipped to deal with these things or constitutionally authorized to do so. But more than anything, the mandate is itself immoral. It's telling American moms and dads that they have to choose between getting a vaccine, even if to do so would cause significant problems for them because of a unique health condition, a religious objection, or otherwise. They've got to choose between getting that unwanted vaccine on the one hand and losing their job on the other. Are we really going to tell them that to honor their own personal autonomy, their own ability to decide what's best for them? We're going to order their employer to fire them, rendering them unemployed, for the time being unemployable. And in some cases, because of the way some of these companies, in anticipation of the yet-to-be-announced mandate, some of these companies that have already started firing people are actually putting them on unpaid administrative leave, such that they can't even collect unemployment. This is just mean. It's mean-spirited. So when you peel back all the layers of all the constitutional arguments, in which there are many, you're left with some policy arguments. But more than anything else, Madam President, we're left with some basic moral arguments, and arguments involving fundamental fairness. This is not who we are. Look, when we disagree, we should be able to disagree without getting someone fired. We should certainly be able to disagree without subjecting potentially hundreds of millions of people to unemployment based on a personal medical decision, one that may have profound health consequences or religious consequences to them personally. I didn't think any of these things were all that controversial. I still don't believe they are. If any of us could talk to people at random from our home states, whether they're from communities or families or households that lean left or right or somewhere else, most people have a basic sense of fairness that transcends political ideology and partisan affiliation. And that basic shared sense of fundamental fairness is utterly at odds with doing this. We're better than this. President Biden, you're better than this. President Biden, you and I don't agree on everything. But I know that you know, President Biden, that this isn't fair. Let's not do this to the people. So all I was asking today, by trying to pass this legislation, was that we reaffirm our commitment to supporting parents in making decisions for their children. I tried to pass that uncontroversial measure, and it's a source of great disappointment and even some surprise that we couldn't even pass that. This ought to be something that's a bare minimum. I appreciate the insights provided by my friend and distinguished colleague, the senator from Washington, who, in objecting to the passage of this measure, shared her thoughts on why she opposes it. But I don't agree with them. Among the arguments she raised was a suggestion that under existing state laws, there are already ways of figuring out when, whether, and in what circumstances parental consent might be required. Now, this is great. I love federalism arguments. I'm happy anytime someone raises a federalism argument. I think that's the kind of argument that doesn't get made nearly enough around here, because it's kind of a watershed structural issue within the Constitution, one that outlines the difference between federal power and state power. You see, our constitutional republic is one in which multiple layers of sovereignty exist. States and their subdivisions enjoy what we call general police powers. The power to enact legislation generally as states and their subdivisions deem appropriate for the protection of health, safety, and welfare. States, in the absence of an express U.S. constitutional prohibition, or in the absence of some restriction in their state constitution, states are presumed to have general police powers. They may enact legislation as they deem fit to benefit their citizens. We, as lawmakers in the federal government, have a narrower view. We have a narrower task. We have a narrower area of authority. We can't just enact something as federal law simply because we think it's a good idea. We have to connect it to one of the enumerated powers made federal by the Constitution. Most of those powers, not all of them, but most of them can be found in one portion of the Constitution, written in relatively plain English, nearly 2.5 centuries ago. It's still easy to read today. It still makes sense today. Article 1, Section 8 makes that clear. We're in charge of national defense, regulating trade or commerce between the states with foreign nations and with the tribes. Trademarks, copyrights, and patents, bankruptcy laws, immigration laws, naturalization laws. There are a few others, but that's the basic gist of it, things that are distinctively national and designated as such by the Constitution. That's within our power. And everything else, as the 10th Amendment reaffirms, stating again what the original Constitution made clear implicitly, it was made explicitly in the 10th Amendment, that powers not made federal by the Constitution and not prohibited to the states by the Constitution are reserved for the states respectively or to the people. There's no accident that they put that phrase in there in the 10th Amendment, or to the people. When you reserve power to the states, when you are in a sense reserving it for the people, and the people are the ultimate sovereigns. We are authorized to act as a federal sovereign only in those narrow areas. And so I get back to the argument that my friend and distinguished colleague, the senator from Washington, made moments ago. She referred to the existence of state laws delineating the circumstances in which parental consent for a medical procedure, including a vaccine, might be acceptable or appropriate. I appreciate the federalism argument. We ought to have more of those. There are far too few of them here. The great irony here is that this focuses on the fact that we shouldn't be operating in this space in the first place. To the degree that she is right, as she absolutely is, to be focusing on the distinction between state power and federal power, that same principle argues a fortiori in favor of us not deciding this on a national level. In other words, if it's true, as it is, that we ought to be focused on state law and what state law requires or allows or contemplates or permits, heavens, yes, let's let state law apply. But you can't have it both ways. If you're going to make this federal, as the President of the United States has purported to do, even though it isn't, then we not only may, I believe we must weigh in. We must weigh in. As the people's elected lawmakers, it's our job to make policy, and it's our job to decide when, whether, to what extent federal policy is unacceptable and needs to be curtailed. So absolutely, the senator from Washington is absolutely right that we should be concerned about what state law says, and state law should be the beginning and the end of the inquiry here. You see, this is what's different between this vaccine mandate and others that have been mandated in the past. We've never seen one that is federal, not applied to the American population as a whole, not as to the general public. We've never seen one done federally, and there are good reasons for this. It isn't a federal beast. So my friend from Washington expressed concern for not trampling on those laws. She couldn't be more right in the fact that we should respect state sovereignty and the sovereignty of the people. That's all the more reason why we should have passed S. 2988 today. S. 2988 is yet another example of a simple modification. That if we're going to go down this road of a federal vaccine mandate, which we should not, but if we were going to, at a bare minimum, we ought to be making this a decision that has to be done in consultation with and with the approval of, not just the notice, but also the consent of parents. It's not too much to ask. The American people have been asked over and over again, especially over the last 18 months with the COVID-19 pandemic, they've been asked to settle. They've been asked to settle for this brooding omnipresence in Washington that tells them what to do. They've been asked to settle for multi-trillion-dollar annual deficits. They've been asked to settle for limited freedoms. Madam President, the American people shouldn't have to settle for those things. They certainly shouldn't have to settle for a federal government acting without authority through one person has the ability to take away one of their most sacred, one of their most fundamental, one of their most cherished God-given rights, which is the right to make decisions involving and uniquely affecting their own children. For anyone within the sound of my voice or reading this, I'd implore you, don't settle. No, don't settle for multi-trillion-dollar annual deficits. Expect Congress to start to care about the inflation that it's causing through reckless spending. Don't settle for this brooding omnipresence of a federal government that is purporting to have the ability to dictate every aspect of your lives. No, expect a government that operates within the space carved out by the Constitution. Don't settle for a government that knows no boundaries around its authority. Expect the government to respect its own limitations. It's time to expect more, and it's time to expect freedom. Thank you, Madam President.